Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Raimy and Bini podcast. Hope you're doing well. Coming off our last episode, which was a real banger, I think, and excited to have this conversation. We had this conversation last year. We'll get into that in just a second. And so it's good to have what effectively is a repeat conversation, which means we've survived a year. Yes, we had a 3-month hiatus in the middle, but we're back with it. And the conversation is going to be about Giving Tuesday today, because that is a subject that is on the rise and it's coming in just a couple of weeks. Before that, I want to remind everyone to like and subscribe and share the podcast with everyone. And if you have suggestions about topics, issues, questions, or guests that we should have on the podcast, by all means, let us know. Always happy to indulge in those recommendations and those ideas, because yours are just as good as ours, if not better. So by all means, bring those up. Raimy, good to see you today. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing excellent, Bini. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. So let's dive in, as we've done most of the episodes, with the good of the week. I give you the floor.
Okay, so this is something I was reading about in a fundraising book, which is the idea of permission-based fundraising. I think it was co-opted from a sales technique that's used in sales, but it's basically asking the person that you're speaking to permission to pitch them, essentially. Can I tell you a little bit about the programs that we run?
Mm-hmm.
Can I set this up? Even saying something as straightforward as, you know, can I tell you what we've done so that I can ask you to make a contribution? And there's a lot of psychology around why the permission-based approach is so effective. And it just struck a chord with me. And I've actually started to use it just in other spheres. So, one case that it's been really useful for me is I've had a couple people who I've started talking to them for me to do some consulting work for them. And they've expressed a little bit of interest in hearing more. It's not been a deep conversation. And then, as I'm noticing tends to be the case quite often, is I don't hear from them. And I'll send them an email and say, hey, Bini, you said that you'd like to hear more.
Yeah.
Can we schedule time to speak? And I don't hear from them. And it happens. I'll send them another email. This happened, let's say 2-3 times in a row over the course of a month, where I'll send them an email. These are people that, again, have expressed interest in speaking to me. And the tactic that I just started using with them is I'll send them another email that said, hey, Bini, I understand this might not be the best time to connect. Would it be okay if I check in with you every couple of weeks to see if it's a better time, or something like that? But applying that permission-based approach to essentially just getting what I want out of the conversation, which is another scheduled conversation. And so far, I have 100% response rate to that email in the affirmative, which does two things, by the way. One, it gets the conversation moving again, because they say, yes, for sure, keep on popping in. I've just been really busy. And so that's great in and of itself. But for me personally, it removes the sort of internal resistance that I have to give up and say, this person is telling me they don't want to meet with me. Let's move on to the next person. But they're telling me, I'm giving them the opportunity to either ignore me again or say, you know what, thanks, but no thanks. And they're actively saying, yes, please come check in with me. So it's just, I don't know, part of one of the reasons why I love fundraising so much is the psychology of it all, the behavioral psychology, why we humans are wired the way that we are, and just finding these little nuggets within them of people are just more receptive to that permission-based approach. If you ask them for permission to do the thing that you want to do, it just kind of lowers the barrier for them, and they're more likely to say yes. It was just a very small win that I've had this past week, but I've been excited about in a really nerdy way. I don't know. What can I say?
Yeah. I mean, the truth is, there's no skin off their back to have you send them another email, right? It's like, it's so passive on their end, which is like, yeah, keep reaching out. I'm not committing to anything other than letting you inside my inbox. I'm not to destroy the momentum or the joy that you're having it, but just to think about it from the other perspective, the other side of that, which is, like, sure, keep reaching out. I'm not guaranteeing anything. I'm not offering anything. And maybe, right? For you, it's like, yeah. So it's almost like permission granted to do the thing I'm uncomfortable doing. And so now I can send you that one pager. I can send you the last thing I worked on for somebody. Here's an example of the work that I've been doing. Maybe this resonates with you, and so on and so forth. It's very upfront, which I think we're very hesitant to be, which is extremely upfront about a lot of things and straightforward. So just to, like, build off of that. I don't exactly have a good of the week at the moment, but maybe it'll come out of this. I I've been pitching, I've been testing, A/B testing, like intro emails to potential donors for an organization, right? And so some of them are way more what I would call cultivate-ish. That's not a word, but like where you're really starting at ground zero, and you're leaving out like the line which basically says, ultimately, I'd like to ask you for a donation. And so you're way, way, way before that as one version of it, which means your timeline is exceptionally long. And the second approach is just like straight up right at the beginning, when you're doing this, you're just saying straight up, look, this is who I am. This is the organization I work for. In this case, particularly, it's warm type of connection. So it's not people who are disconnected from the organization. They know it. They're actually affiliated in some way with it. And straight up at the outset saying this, my name is, Raimy Rubin. I'm part of the philanthropy team at such and such an organization. This is why I'm reaching out, right? It cuts to the chase in a way that eliminates a lot of the ambiguity around some of those other emails, because often the response to those first emails are, what do you want from me? Who are you? What organization is this? Like, so one email, I just as in the A/B test, the response from one of the people was, that was a really well-crafted and beautifully written email. I just don't know what you want from me. And I was like, okay, good. So let's take that one, put it back in the lab and see how you make that a better one. The second version of it was basically, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is the organization I'm working for. And admittedly got a lot of crickets, right? It got a lot of no responses because this person is clearly angling towards some sort of an ask at some point, but, qualifying it in some way. So it was just an interesting test, that that sort of, I'm taking permission without actually asking permission is probably the right way to say that, as an interesting way to go about that kind of intro into the space. So it's just an interesting thing along the way. So I hear it. I like it. I like the approach. It's interesting. I actually heard somebody, I don't remember who it was, talk about that too, which is in the course of a conversation, would it be okay if I now shared some of the information about the work? And that's much harder because you're sitting with the person. But the same idea, and they're not going to say no, but like, the same sense is like, let's move this conversation to a different space, and the person's just willing to listen and to hear what it is that you have to say. So I love it as a good of the week because I think it's a super interesting concept and construct. I hope it works ultimately, and you get some of those people to actually buy your services. They should. I'm telling you now, everyone, you should buy Raimy's services. There's a plug.
There,
Free.
yeah, we can end the podcast now. We're good. Podcast over.
RaimyRubin.com, RaimyRubin.com for all of your ghostwriting and copy and messaging and comms, donor comms services. Did I get that right?
Sure, we'll go with that.
I'll give a good of the week really quickly, just because I can appreciate this. So I mentioned to you before we started that my son had a basketball game last night, which did not go well for his team in the least. And no need to go into the details. It was really a rough evening for himself and his team. And in the aftermath of that is like, the parenting moment is, how do you handle the moment after your son's team gets, just crushed in a game? And I feel like I did a good job of it. I have no idea. We'll find out. I'm sure my wife will be listening and she'll tell me I did it right or wrong. But I was mostly silent. I just let him talk, right? Get through his frustration and his disappointment and his anger and all the negativity. And then I asked him for the silver lining. What was the plus? Were there any pluses in a massacre on a basketball court, right? And he was able to pull out a couple, about sort of the way he handled himself as a teammate, the way he handled himself as someone coming, who was sitting for some of that game, getting off the bench during timeouts, his hustle, right? In terms of how he approaches the game and how he plays defense and things like that, even in the course of being blown out on the court. If it wasn't clear to anybody just yet, his team lost badly. Anyway, so I want to appreciate his ability at 16 to not simply just wallow in the disaster that it was, and the ability to take a moment and zoom in on some of his really those things that he talked about in the silver lines are a core value to him as an athlete and as a teammate. And to me, that's like important to emphasize and reemphasize that kind of a thing. So I want to you've shout out to your kids over the last couple of weeks. So I'm doing the same thing here in a not great moment when I feel like he didn't have to do that. And he could have really just simply just said, be quiet. I want to just sit in the disgust of this. Instead, he really went in a different direction with it a little bit and really was able to pull out a couple of things about what was good in an, generally speaking, altogether not good experience. So
Yeah,
there you
good,
go.
good for you to help him get there. I mean, I feel like it's very hard to validate someone's feelings when they're in it at that moment, and nothing you're going to say is going to make them feel better. And for you to, it's also hard to like help them see the forest from the trees, where it's like in the scheme of things, not a big deal, but in this moment, it is a big deal. And I feel like that reframing for him and just letting him stay in the moment, but just kind of shifting the focus to something else is it's a really nice way to get him out of it. That's great.
Thank you. I sometimes have good moments as a parent, so I appreciate that. Uh, okay. That's our good of the week. That's a lot longer than usual. So all of you who are still with us, who are sitting on the edge of your seat waiting for the Giving Tuesday conversation, here we go. So as I mentioned we talked about Giving Tuesday last year. You and I have talked about Giving Tuesday for a number of years. We've worked on projects around Giving Tuesday. We put together webinars and seminars around the subject, all that stuff around it. And as much as we talked about it last year, and it comes up every year, right? And so I wanted to come back to that conversation. I thought it'd be good for us to come back to that conversation again, as it's just a couple of weeks away, and dive in. So pick up where you want to pick up, where you want to start, and let's have this conversation around Giving Tuesday 2025.
So I find Giving Tuesday very interesting. Just as a brief history, and this will be very brief. I'm sure I'm going to gloss over many, many important details, but it started in 2012. It came out of the 92nd Street Y in New York with support from, I believe, the United Nations Foundation is who originally funded it. And the goal was really to create
What was the year? Give me that year again.
2012. And that's when it originally started. It didn't become a thing for a year or two because it was low. I don't know. I don't know legitimately if they ever envisioned that it would become a sort of international movement as it has become. But the goal was to create a moment of generosity after a long weekend of consumerism, right? Like this is coming off the heels of Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and this was the next evolution of it, where we've now celebrated and purchased, and now let's donate. The first year was small. There were a few nonprofits. I believe most were local to New York, and they got a lot of corporate sponsorship, I believe. I would think a lot of companies were involved in the original Giving Tuesdays first couple of years as well. This also came on the heels of, or kind of came in line right when they hit a nice time in social media where the subsequent years, 13, 14, 15, it sort of blew up social media wise. And that's how it became a thing. And that's when I think the national vision or the international vision of creating like this cultural habit of giving was really formed. And that's one of the reasons why it's hard for me to talk about Giving Tuesday, because I'm of two minds of it. On the one hand, it's one of the only examples I can think of where we have like manufactured this cultural habit of something, which is so awesome and so incredibly hard to do. And they've done an amazing, amazing, amazing job of turning it nothing into something. I mean, it's quite remarkable from that perspective. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, as impressive as it is, and there's a lot of giving that goes on, and there's a lot of activity around giving, meaning I think there's a lot of traffic to donation pages. I think there's a lot of conversation about giving around this time. It's not nearly as impactful. It doesn't have the same punch that end of year giving has, which in this case is in the same month, right? Because Giving Tuesday, I believe this year is at the very beginning of December. So in the same month, we're going to have Giving Tuesday, and we're going to have that run up to the end of the calendar year. And it pains me a little bit when organizations spend too much time on Giving Tuesday and not enough time on end of year giving. So those are sort of like my of two minds of it, that I want to give it its proper shout out and kudos because they've done something that I really haven't seen anyone else do. It has not been replicated in any way, shape, or form. And on the other hand, I still don't really feel like fundraising organizations should be spending their very limited time and resources on Giving Tuesday at the expense of end of year giving.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple thoughts on that. Good background information around it because I did not realize it's been around that long. My first question, just at the outset of that, is I wonder if they had an idea about it for the long term from the beginning in terms of a strategy or an idea that this could actually hold. Sometimes I feel like they didn't and still don't a little bit. Like that's I don't know. I'd love to ask because I'm super curious about some of that stuff to really know how it evolved, how the thinking evolved and developed over time into something more, formal and substantial as a standalone um, entity, as I believe it is now. But to me, like I really wonder. I mean, I'm always interested about the strategy questions or the intention questions. I never asked the intent question because I never like to question people's intent. But the strategy overall over the long term or how they're thinking about it is something that to me is curious. It's a curiosity of mine from the beginning. And one of the reasons why I say that is I get the timing of when Giving Tuesday falls out, right? Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Thanksgiving, the whole thing. But if you're thinking strategically, the move would have been potentially to just co-opt the last 3 days of the year and make that a formal giving season and just jump on top of that because it was already happening. And that's where the most of it is. And you're just simply branding a period of time that already existed. If I was going to be selfish about Giving Tuesday in that way, or whatever it would be called, let's say, that's when I would do it, right? Not on some random Tuesday at the end of November, especially when you know that a month later, this massive giving period already exists, culturally defined because of taxes or whatever at end of year giving. So you're coming up against the behemoth and it's not one you're ever going to win, right? So I want that whole thing always raises like the strategy question to me, and either you move it or this is decided where it's going to be. So related to that, and you can jump in on that, is the only other examples of it that I could think of in the U.S. are Super Bowl Sunday, which is almost like a holiday, but but fully created a whole cloth from nothing, Prime Day with Amazon. Right. Amazon created a random day in July that's now a massive shopping day simply because they could and it worked. Right. It's like a day, as much as people give to Black Friday and Cyber Monday in terms of shopping, you do hear people talk about Prime Day. And it's like, it's a big thing. So to me, that's the only other example of it. That's purely commercial in nature, but totally created from nothing.
Yeah. Well, I want to just pick up on the point you made about if done differently, they could have created Giving Tuesday with the end of year giving. I think to say it a little bit differently, it's hard enough to create a cultural habit, but essentially what they're trying to do is create a cultural habit while breaking another cultural habit of end of year giving. They're asking people to essentially not give end of year and to give on Giving Tuesday instead. And I think those two things are very hard to do independent of one another, and they're certainly hard to do with one another.
Yeah. In that space, then just to add on, not to pile on, but to add on to that point, it's already hard enough, right, to create the first one and to break the second one, which is, again, so entrenched, is, I wouldn't say impossible, extremely difficult. And then on top of that, like you're putting the organizations, not intentionally, but putting nonprofits into this sort of space of, well, now what? Like, what do we do that we know we have end of year giving, but this thing exists and we can't let it go with doing nothing. So we have to come up with a way to use it. And then we have to answer to the people, in our world if we don't do anything. So on some level, creating more work for an organization than, than anything else. And so already a busy time because again, from the calendar perspective, you're already in end of year giving mode, I would imagine, by the time Giving Tuesday arrives. And so now you have to rejigger and reevaluate your strategy from months before to either create the new habit or to create a new habit for some part of an audience that maybe doesn't yet exist. Like you're looking for a specific thing, which is maybe new donors or donor acquisition for that day. And so you wonder about the value and the worth of that effort in trying to create this habit on a day when, maybe that's not the best way to go about it. And maybe I would rather just lump those things together as sort of parallel strategies that I'm working on for the end of year.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, that what's the motivation behind organizations getting involved in Giving Tuesday now? I understand when this first started, you didn't know what it was going to be. So
Yeah.
I can totally understand the excitement of having a national day of philanthropy is great for nonprofits. I think there are good motivations and bad motivations to getting involved in Giving Tuesday. It's not a good idea to dedicate time and energy and resources to Giving Tuesday if the reason that you're doing so is because of some sort of FOMO factor where you see other organizations in your space doing it. It's not a good reason because a board member is pushing you to do it. Maybe they're sitting on another organization's board and that organization is doing it. So therefore, as you indicated, they're going to question, why aren't we doing this also? Those are bad reasons to do it. Those are doing it just for the sake of doing it. And that's really where I've seen a lot of organizations fall short of whatever their expectations or goals were. The good reasons for doing it, in my mind, is if you have a company who's offering a match. I see a lot of corporate giving to Giving Tuesday, and I'm also curious, when I looked into some of the data that around Giving Tuesday, I am very curious how much of it comes from corporate gifts, because I do see this as sort of a corporate event in a lot of ways. And so if you have some sort of matching component, or corporations are giving away their corporate gifts on Giving Tuesday, that is a phenomenal reason to do it, right? Because that money is presumably going to be given away to someone on that day. It's a question of who, and if you can go after that, and if you have relationships with corporations that are interested in that, I would absolutely suggest you do it. That to me is like the number one best reason to do it. And if you have some sort of like history of doing well with it, I know for a while there were local foundations were trying to push it all together in Pittsburgh. I'm trying to think if this was on Giving Tuesday or not. I'm blanking now, but in Pittsburgh, in a lot of cities, I think they have a day of giving in and of itself. And in a major
Yeah.
foundation of a city will then be a matcher. So if there's any sort of matching component of money that is only available to you on that day, then I think it's a good idea. Otherwise, I just am skeptical of the concept and how much individuals are giving on Giving Tuesday that otherwise would just be giving later on in the year.
Right. I hear that. I guess, yeah, it just brought up the thought, like if Giving Tuesday went away, not that nobody would notice, it wouldn't matter for most organizations. And I'm not advocating it. I hate to say this, I'm just asking questions. If you know the reference, you know. But the just, yeah, I struggle with it because I hear from leaders in organizations, and I start to see the materials start to show up in my inbox, about a month before. And I wonder for a leader about the value of doing it, in terms of how much it helps them. So like, I think I've said this to you before. I said this maybe last year, the same thing. I love the idea that there's a day to appreciate donors. Let's say like Donor Appreciation Day. I love the idea that there's a day to appreciate the people who get no credit for the good work that your organization is doing it. And so to me, like that's worth a day in and of itself, to highlight and celebrate and appreciate those two audiences within your ecosystem. And that's how I used it in the past, which was simply just to appreciate people on my team or people who donors, and thank you. And the whole idea of the Thanksgiving notion of using it as a Thanksgiving day to thank donors and not ask them for anything. So I can appreciate the value of that kind of a thing. As I was sort of pouring through some of the data also, it just raised a lot of questions for me. The long-term impact value for organizations to have a day like this. Certainly, I can tell you, and I asked this, I put it out on LinkedIn, I put it out on my status on WhatsApp, just to ask people in a couple of WhatsApp groups as well, if anyone in my circle and sphere was doing it this year, right? And so my circle, I have a pretty good network, but a lot of my closer people are within the Jewish community. And one person told me that they were doing a Giving Tuesday this year. And because mainly, I believe it was that their leadership wanted them to do it. A few other people reached out and said they had poor experiences with it in the past, specifically because of the kind of organizations maybe that they were working in. And so it just lent the question, which is like, now, okay, this is year 13. What are we doing here? Uh, you know, like, what are we actually accomplishing? How much money is actually moving? How many donors are actually sticking around? Is there a strategy here that actually works? Is it not just another thing like we talked about with GoFundMe a couple of weeks ago, slightly different, where it's just being talked up by the, the consultorati, right, around us. That's a made up term. I'm going to be curious how the transcription software pulls it. But talks about it and talks through it just to make it another point of something to talk about this year now. And the reason I use that as an example in the Jewish community, specifically as an example, because you and I have talked about calendar, the Jewish holiday calendar, the structure of that calendar over 12 months sets up a certain way. And if you layer on the secular calendar, the regular calendar on top of that, then you have different giving moments throughout the year. And Giving Tuesday in that space is not one of them, right? And so you buck up against the calendar. You're bucking up against, as you talked about, habits and habituation and ritualization of giving in a certain way. You bump up against the culture of giving in a certain style and structure. And at 13, I wonder if it's a time to have a good conversation around, like, this is a good idea, I think, in some way, shape, or form. How do we make it better? How do we put it out there where it's way more successful? Again, maybe I'm judging what success is in this case. And is it coming up? Is it meeting the need, or is it coming up short? And I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with its proximity to year-end giving. If Giving Tuesday in some hypothetical universe were in the middle of the summer, if it came on the heels of Prime Day, if it was Prime Day and then Donation Day, whatever that day would be called, I think it would look different. I think the reason that it invites skepticism is because of its proximity to end-of-year giving. And just to kind of throw out the Next After, which is a company that does a tremendous amount of research on giving, just put out an end of year ebook that had a lot of data points. And there was one section that was on Giving Tuesday. So they actually compared Giving Tuesday to end of year giving. And there were just 2 points that came out to me that I thought were really interesting. So they talk about the conversion rates. They don't do a great job. Normally Next After is very thorough on this sort of thing, but they don't tell me what the conversion rate is of, like what the denominator is. What are we actually measuring? But regardless, conversion rate for Giving Tuesday is 2%. The conversion rate for end of year giving is 3.5%. So automatically we're saying that people that are receiving those pieces of communication, presumably on Giving Tuesday, are much less likely to give than they are at the end of the year. And then what is a little bit more easier for me to wrap my arms around is the average gift on Giving Tuesday is about $140. The average gift at the end of year is $250. And on the last day of the year, the 31st, it jumps up to just under $300. So we're looking at, like, that the average gift size is half on Giving Tuesday of what it is at end of year giving. And I'm generally speaking, you will not find me ever telling organizations that they're asking too much, because I find that most organizations don't ask enough. But in this particular case, I'm just wondering, if you're going to ask on December 2nd for a gift, are you doing yourself a disservice by not waiting 3 weeks and making that ask on December 20th as opposed to December 2nd? Because you're going to, according to the data, get double the size of a gift. Like that to me is what invites the skepticism.
Right. I think that only builds on what we've talked about so far, which is, we've talked about the cultural habitual piece of it, and now the data, I'm not saying is confirming it, but at least in a certain aspect of it, with the people that are already in your sphere as givers, and it's almost like a no-brainer not to ask them at
That's
that
the
point.
question. Is it better than nothing? Because generally speaking, asking is better than not asking. Or is it coming at the expense of the ask that you're going to make anyway in 3 weeks from now?
Right. So the next test is sort of like, let's do it where we don't ask then, we nudge then, right? And then see what the results are because we nudged on the Giving Tuesday. We use it as a day to thank, an update, report, whatever it is. And we nudge towards that end of year gift. And then after, we can tell next after this, go back and poll the donors, survey the donors if you can, and ask them what drove them to give or to give more this year and see if that was more valuable. Again, as a marker in the calendar, as an anchor in the calendar to do something, right? But not specifically to make a request. So that's why I think I think you looking back at the data, I think is super good because the data doesn't the data tells a lot of different stories depending on the story you're looking to tell, right? So a lot of data gets tossed out there, and Giving Tuesday has a ton of data, although not all the data I would really want, honestly. But just as an example, if a gazillion organizations are doing something on Giving Tuesday, there has to be a way today that you can really coalesce all of that information and hold on to all of that and then use all that rather than just simply sampling from a handful or whatever the number of organizations that it is. And then really explaining how you establish what the numbers and the dollars are, that would be really valuable too. Because I wouldn't want to include numbers from organizations that aren't participating on that time of the year to make the numbers look better. Anyway, so, but I definitely feel like what you're adding here, I mean, to me, as a leader in an organization, it would be hard. I'd be hard pressed to explain why I would ask you now for the gift if I'm going to ask you again in 3 weeks. When else are you asking for a gift twice in 3 weeks? Even on new donors, right? You and I have talked about the idea that if you get a new donor, when's the right time to ask for the next gift? And the shocking data point that nobody believes is sooner than you think, right? What is it within 3 months? I think it's right. 3 months is the number, or less than six, certainly
Yeah.
less than 6 months, right? You're
Yeah.
asking for
Yeah.
another gift,
90 days
whereas
is
everybody
the,
else is like heading for the hills at that point in terms of asking for another gift. The data says the exact opposite. And so, like, you know, if I was running an organization and the board asked me, are we doing Giving Tuesday? Right. I would say, this is what we're doing Giving Tuesday. And the reason why we're doing it this way in Giving Tuesday is because I want end of year giving to be better. And so we're not asking today. We're doing a lot of other things today, but we're not asking for money today. We're specifically not asking for money today to help us, you know, bolster what we're trying to do at the end of the year, and the belief that that effort 4 weeks in advance is going to actually really have a market impact and increase on what we're doing at the end of the year.
yeah, I'm curious. Your one contact that responded that they're doing a Giving Tuesday campaign. Did that person go into any details as to what that entails? Is that just a basic email campaign? Is it more sophisticated than that?
Wasn't something more sophisticated than that. It was like I don't want to call it a half effort, but it felt like a half effort, and just because almost like they have to do it rather than
To check the box.
check the box, as opposed to saying strategically, no, we're not doing that. We're going to do this. And that was always the theory in the webinar that I gave. I think I gave it multiple times in and around the season of Giving Tuesday, which was more about either launching the end of year campaign at that point, like as a kickoff, as an opportunity to thank people in it with the idea that you're setting the stage for an ask later on, or to raise a specific amount for a specific thing, either for a match, using that just to raise a match, or you had a specific project that was independent of what you were doing at the end of the year, so that you were able to separate and distinguish between those two things if you were actually raising money at this point. But anyone who was asking me, and have in the past, I would tell them not to ask on Giving Tuesday.
So that sort of brings me to the next question I wanted to ask you, which is,
Yeah.
I know you love the tax law stuff, and it's over my head. So, but I understand in general that in President Trump's first term, the tax laws were changed in a way that people were no longer itemizing their charitable donations. And I recognize that over the course of the next year or so, some of those laws are going to change again, and it's
Change.
going to be more advantageous than it has been for the last 10 years or so, but still not as advantageous as it was prior to first term President Trump. Do I have that right so far?
Yes.
Okay. So if most people are not itemizing their charitable donations anymore, let me ask the question this way. Are you surprised that people are still giving end of year, even though there's no tax
No.
benefit to doing so? Okay, why?
No, it's baked in. It's baked into as part of what you do at the end of the year during holiday season. You can't separate those two things. It's important to appreciate that the end of the calendar year in the US lines up nicely with the end of the tax year in the US. And so those things work really well together to create this structure an opportunity for people to ask and to give, right? It helps that you have Santas on the street collecting for the Salvation Army that time of the year, well in advance of the idea that anybody had for a Giving Tuesday, or that part of the ethos of the holidays, it's the giving season, again, that precedes Giving Tuesday and on some level the tax benefit that accrued to it. And so it's just part and parcel of who that country is. Whereas in other countries in the world, end of year giving with December is not the same, right? And so their tax year is March or whatever, or corporate is July or whatever it is. So it doesn't line up. So I'm not surprised at all. What I am surprised by is the opposite end of that, which is organizations that still think about it and don't think more clearly about the 12-month calendar timeline that's more advantageous to them to ask at a different time of the year than to try to, pigeonhole's the wrong term, force feed an ask at a time when it's not advantageous to them. That to me doesn't make any sense. And there are, to me, too many organizations that are trying to square the circle here by trying to do something at this time of the year just because of X or Y or Z factor, when X and Y and Z are no longer a factor and no longer a benefit to them. If most of your people are donating small amounts of money over the last number of years, then like, and you were still talking about it, you were not talking the right language was off. It just wasn't true. It's changing now, and how it changes over in 2026 will be interesting to see how it changes back a little bit, but there's still a cap, right? It's not like, and to get in the weeds, and shout out to my brother who's the tax lawyer, but it's like you get into the weeds of how much is actually going to be available for people to deduct. Is it universal? Is it itemized? Where does it sit? How does it help? Right. So, if you're an organization, for example, that only deals with wealthy people, right? So that's possible. And so all of your donations are above a certain threshold. It doesn't matter when you ask those people during the course of the year. Those are wealthy people all the time, right? If your donors are smaller donors, then there's a different time of the year when you're asking. If they're all monthly donors, then why are we even having this conversation around Giving Tuesday if all of your donors are monthly givers? Unless the switch that you're using here for Giving Tuesday is to either amplify or try to grow your monthly giving program, right? And so that's the marketing around what you're trying to do. Habits are hard to change. And so it's ingrained into people that this is the giving season and they feel good about it. And this is when they do it. So changing that is hard to do, right? For the organization, it's less hard to do because the strategy says, you know what, for us, January is better. Um, there's an organization I work with. I won't say the name out loud, but there's an event that relates to their organization that's at the end of January, right? Which would be far more advantageous to them to raise then. And yet they run their campaign now. And I've tried for a couple of years to try to convince them that it made more sense globally to move what they're doing to a time that was more beneficial to the global market of their donors and supporters. And they think I'm out of my mind. We have to do this now. Right. So to me, like, that's the thing. You're an organization, you're supposed to be smart. You want to have the best intentions. You want to use the timeline and the calendar to the best of your ability. Like, be really smart about when you ask. It's like asking for donations at 2:00 in the morning Well, I asked, congratulations. You asked when people are sleeping. And so therefore they're not giving to you.
The reason that you're encouraging this organization to move their campaign outside of end of year into January is specifically because they have more of a global audience. So the
Few
December
reasons.
30th. Okay.
Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just like, I'm on
No,
a
no, no, bring it
soapbox.
on.
You put me here, so I'm on a soapbox.
Good.
Son, yes, the cause that they are involved with is a global cause. It has audience in many countries where December 31st is not a day of giving. One. Two, the event on that calendar day later in the month is also massively global. And so it just simply gives them major platform and visibility to do something at a much larger scale than, say, now. And they can build to it. And then to use a term that you used to talk about, which is, when's the best time to sell shoes, right? In the season when people sell shoes, or when the season when people don't sell shoes, nobody's asking for money at the end of January, right? To me. So it's like blue ocean season for the first gift of 2026 is end of the month, which is more advantageous to us. And you can use all the leverage and strategy you want to kick off the year of giving as opposed to end the year of giving, right? And so, like, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, I'll be honest. I can convince you to do it at the end of the year, and I can convince you to do it at the end of January too. But you have to simply weigh them and say this makes the most sense for us as an organization. So, like, you got to look at the calendar. So just to move it even further, pick another day, right? So Prime Day's in July, right? You and I remember this when we were both doing peer-to-peer campaigns on a consistent, regular basis, week in, week out. The summer was slow, right? So what would organizations say to us about this, about July?
One runs campaigns, though. No one's fundraising. Everyone's on vacation, whatever.
Right. And what would you say to them?
No one else is asking them for money now.
Yeah. So it cuts both ways. Like, and it's just a question of whether or not you see it empty or you see it full, right? In that space. What you see and what I see in some places in certain communities is they use this summer for different kinds of events, right? For different venues and different kinds of asks that create a different kind of connection and vibe for their donor that maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, they weren't doing, but they're doing it now. More experiential, it's more hands-on, it's more one-to-one, it's more intimate, right? Because they're using, at least in the US, they're using the outdoors and the weather and whatever it is and different spaces to their advantage. So they looked at it and said, you know what? July is great for us, right? And now if you look, it's packed. The summer's packed with runs, with walks, with crafts and fairs, barbecues and outdoors events and kid events and all kinds of different fundraisers. And now the calendar, for the most part, is filled up for different organizations because they're just getting smarter about how they want to be as organizations. And that's way better than saying, well, they picked a random day in late November, early December. We're going to do that one.
So interesting. So interesting.
I mean, as I said, you can manufacture it here and create the urgency. And we talked in the past about, ginning up urgency when none exists. Right? You can do that. But I just wonder if that's the best use of this time for your organization. Again, and we have not differentiated between small, medium, and large organizations. We have not differentiated necessarily. A little bit I did about Jewish community versus not Jewish community. But I think it does cut across a lot of different cultures and communities as to, this is a day, it's an anchor, it's a tool in the calendar. It's neither good nor bad, right? It is, right? It's now part of the fabric of the calendar. It's not moving. It has a name, it has a moniker, it's known, it's noticeable, it's all that other stuff. And then it's just a question of, okay, how do we use it, right? What's the system we're going to build around it to make this most beneficial for us over the course of the year? And there are a lot of things you can think about doing there. You have to, I would still say this is true. I think you have to pick one. I think you can't let the day go with nothing. Even if it's simply just an email to everybody thanking them for their support, which is the lowest bar that you can jump over, right? I mean, there's a line, you don't even have to jump. You can just sort of like tiptoe and step over it. And I think that's fine. But like, that's the minimum. If you want to go up a notch with that, you want to send out crazy as it sounds, 2 emails, one thanking your donors and a separate one thanking your team or highlighting a board member, whatever you want to do. I think that's that's a good use of it. It's the smallest use of it. But if you're going to go fundraise, then you have to really do it. Don't have to it. I'd rather you didn't do it than have to it.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to frame it. I like that.
And then as you're doing it, I was just talking about somebody this morning about thinking like second and third way down the line is once you make the decision to do it and you have to start thinking about what the system's going to be. So then, okay, like there's a lot of things that go into that. And that's part of the calculus of how much we want to do here. Right.
Sure.
And that fits into the larger count. That's why I think on some level, this conversation between you and me about GivingTuesday should happen in July, because when you're thinking about sort of how you want to lay out your year from one year to the next, and you want to think about November, you don't want to think about late November, early December, in early November. You want to think about it in July when you can pencil in the full calendar and look at it and say, okay, this is what we do here. This is when we want to launch our monthly giving program. But wait, there's GivingTuesday that falls in there. And how do we shift it, move it all around and get it right as best as we can with our calendar and our structure, and not mess both up because we wanted to try to do more things than we could possibly do.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
I can't beat the soapbox right there. I can't go past that. That's
Fine. So we'll leave it right there. That is the conversation. We'll put the pin in Giving Tuesday for now. I am interested and curious to see what people send out. I do read them when I get them in my inbox, and I'm curious. I'm curious as to all the, I used to made up the term consulterati. So all the commenterati that's going to be on LinkedIn around that same stuff. And I will put this out there. If you see something good, okay, like a good campaign, a good program that somebody's doing that really hit for Giving Tuesday, I want to know about it and I want to see it because I want to applaud them for having done good effort here and using this to their best benefit as an organization. The bad, there's plenty of bad. I don't need to see the bad. Half my inbox is full of the bad. But I want to see the good from an organization that's doing good work, generally speaking, obviously, but specifically and uniquely doing good work here within the constructs and the confines of Giving Tuesday. How about that?
Amazing. I love it.
Thanks, everyone, for paying attention, for listening this week. Look forward to seeing you next week at the Raimy and Bini podcast. Take care.